set my system. Well, that last time.
You thought you
The
set
last
us,
time.
but you screwed yourself.
The last time, you guys had 4-7. So all I could do is try and hopefully not get hurt. You guys sitting there with 2 rookies. I remember Paul.
What's this?
both easy to access from the roadside. I'm going to tell you about them now, but then I'll point out the parking areas as we approach them. Neither of these waterfalls is going to break any height or volume records, but both are pretty in their own way, especially if the weather is nice and we can catch the mountain backdrop with the fall's views. The second falls is called Sacred Dancing Cascade. Both falls are definitely worth a short stop, but if I was forced to only pick one of the two, I would choose the Sacred Dancing Cascade, purely because the view is completely unobstructed from the attractive footbridge that crosses the creek. Both falls are along the route of the Johns Lake Loop Trail, a relatively easy hike to complete in a couple of hours or less. I'll point out the pullouts.
Thank you.
Here's the pull-out parking area for McDonald Falls coming up quickly on our left. Watch out for oncoming traffic. Take the stairs down to the viewing area at the end of the pull-out.
That's the one I missed.
We're approaching the parking area for the Sacred Dancing Cascade on our left coming up quickly. After we park, let's walk to this end of the pullout to access the short trail to the bridge, where we'll find the best viewing. Ready for the answer?
No.
The highest peak is Mount Cleveland. and it is a whopping 10,466 feet.
Got it.
Tell you what, if you got within 500 feet of the answer, I am still giving you full points.
I get full
Now,
points.
Cleveland sits on the north side of the park, just about 4 miles from the Canadian border. We're getting closer to Avalanche Creek, a pretty popular area for a stroll or even a longer hike. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we ought to stop. Offer a little bit of advice about driving going to the Sun Road, okay? When I suggest a place we might like to stop, you'll want to use caution. Sometimes drivers are totally distracted by the views and by finding parking. That guy behind us, he might not be paying attention. As we'll often see, there isn't much space to make a quick pass or stop on the shoulder. And when we're looking for parking, trust me, if it says no parking, they mean it. The Rangers are swift to give out those tickets. Okay, that was just a little bit of housekeeping. Let's talk about Avalanche Creek. It offers us a wonderful opportunity to explore a dense cedar hemlock forest filled with ferns, mosses, and trees that for the most part are more than 500 years old. Surprisingly, the area feels very much like a forest we'd find in the Pacific Northwest. And in fact, Avalanche Creek marks the farthest east that western red cedar trees live. Now, what makes it even more special is we won't find forests like this after we drive over the Continental Divide to the park's eastern side. That side is dominated by lodgepole pine trees, and it looks more like what we'd imagine the forests of the Rocky Mountains to look like, drier and dramatic. Now, you may be wondering, like I did, why the west side and east side of the park are so different. Well, for one, the east side is windier, bringing warm winds in the winter and drier winds in the summer. Conversely, the west side benefits from the Pacific Coast rains. Now, the Rocky Mountains are at their narrowest point here at the Continental Divide here in Glacier. So we have two very different ecosystems. Pacific coastal ecosystem and the Great Plains ecosystem, coexisting closer than anywhere else along the Continental Divide. The way I see it, we get to see two. At Avalanche Creek, there's an easy, family-friendly boardwalk trail called Trail of the Cedars Nature Trail. It's about a half-mile long. After that, it turns into a well-trodden path that follows the creek to Avalanche Lake. Now that is about a 4.5 mile out and back, moderately difficult hike, but you'll see at least 6 waterfalls during spring. If we decide to stroll the boardwalk or do the hike, we'll want to carry our bear spray and not bury it in our backpack. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but because of the rare event that we could run into a grizzly on the dashboard of our car. After the campground turnoff on our right, we'll see a number of parking spots on the right for Trail of the Cedars Nature Trail and Avalanche Creek hike.
Trail of the Cedars is pretty full already.
I don't see any empty parking.
It's 1924. While going to the Sun Roads route was being planned, Stephen Mather, the first director of the National Park Service, along with 8 architects, rode horses into the valley and up over the Continental Divide. When they got to Logan Pass, can you imagine? They just stood staring out at the view. At the time, those involved with the road debated the best possible routes to connect the east side of the park to the west. National Park Service engineer George Goodwin, who was an authority on mountain road construction, stood there and waved his arms back and forth, envisioning switchbacks like they had in Europe. He thought there should be 15 switchbacks on this side of the valley and another 3 on the eastern side of the park. As the cars zigzagged one way or another, the driver would see the cars below zigzagging the other way on a steep 8% grade. Goodwin thought the switchbacks would be a spectacular engineering feat and an attraction people would flock to see. Also in the party was Thomas Vint, a landscape architect, who disagreed. He boldly stated that Goodwin's switchbacks would look like a logging or mining road, causing huge scars on the pristine environment that they were. 1924, roughly 29 of the 51 miles of the road had been constructed, starting from both the west and east sides of the route, most of which was relatively easy construction following the shorelines of long lakes. The 8 miles along what's called the Garden Wall above the loop was well known to be the toughest. So now it was time to get into some serious road work. And they assembled their crew. While one crew worked, one was traveling into the work site and one was heading out. All right, my friends, let's take a survey. What is the lowest hourly wage you've worked for? Well, those who built the road were paid 50 cents to $1.15 per hour, depending on skill level and job. Remember, it was built during the 1920s and early 30s, and when the Great Depression hit, men were desperate for work. Even though this work was very seasonal, they took it. At the peak of construction, more than 300 men were drilling holes and filling them with dynamite to blast away the rock faces. Then next to Powder Monkey, guess who the most important person on the crew was? Yes, the camp cook, of course it was. Local farmers and their sons were also hired to work on going to the Sun Road, and that helped the economies of communities nearby. One young Montana lad showed up to work as a cat skinner, and the foreman waved him off, saying, "You're a little too young, kid." The kid replied, "See that guy working the grader? That's my little brother, and I taught him everything he knows." With Glacier filled with grizzlies, black bears, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, moose, and more, I'd say we have a pretty good chance of seeing wildlife while we're here. Now, just because these animals live here does not mean they are tame. I guess that's where the word wilderness comes from, isn't it? In fact, all animals here are very much wild. So, what if we pull over or we're walking on the trail and we see a wild animal? To ensure everyone stays safe, park rangers ask that we keep 75 feet or more between us and moose, bighorn sheep, and mountain. Enough space and reduces the sense that we may be a threat. Now, when it comes to bears and wolves, a little further. We should stay at least 300 feet away from them. Bears need a lot of space to feel unthreatened. And if we're walking on a trail, best to hike in groups and make a lot of noise like clapping or calling out. That will reduce the chance that we surprise a bear. It's also a good idea for us to be checking out our surroundings, looking for bear prints, scanning areas where bears like to eat, like berry patches, and keeping an eye out for bear poop. We want to quietly, okay? Avoid eye contact and do not run. If it approaches us, that bear spray is the best deterrent. Now, to state the obvious, it's best if we know how to use it before we get into any dicey situations. Since we entered Glacier National Park, I've mentioned the term Now, that is a term you may not be familiar with, so I'm going to explain it. Running from north to south through the entire mainland continent of North America, there's a line of mountains where rainfall and snowmelt either flows west towards the Pacific Ocean or east towards the Atlantic. If we were to stand with our legs straddled across the Continental Divide and drop some water just 1 foot on the west side, and imagine it doesn't absorb into the ground, that water would find its way into a stream that would find its way into a river, which would eventually empty into the Pacific Ocean. Here in Glacier National Park, water on the west side of the Continental Divide mostly finds its way to the Flathead River. The Flathead River eventually joins the mighty Columbia, which on the east side of the Continental Divide can flow east to the Gulf of Mexico But it can also be separated to flow to the north, which means it joins a watershed system that eventually drains into the Hudson Bay in Canada's far northeast. Because Glacier's water flows into 3 major river basins, millions of people are dependent on the water that flow from here for their drinking water. The next time we use a water bottle filling station in the park, we can thank the mighty mountains surrounding us for the fresh, high-quality water. My friends, we're approaching another of my favorite human-made structures on the route. There's a short section where it just wasn't possible to create a stable rock cutout for the road to sit on, supported by a rock wall. The solution was that a tunnel had to be cut through the rock. Workers blasted and jackhammered a 192-foot-long tunnel that was only 18 feet tall, just big enough for the construction equipment to slither on through. In the original tunnel, the inside walls were left very raw and exposed, making the tunnels look like they were the entrance to a cave. In the old days, the constantly melting glaciers up above would trickle down and create a waterfall at the entrance. Now, that looks pretty cool, but it's a lot of rock instability. The 2 observational windows that we see didn't used to have the masonry railings. Now, those were added later. In 1966, when workers increased the size of the tunnel, they also lined it with concrete and added a drainage system. I know, bummer, right? No more waterfall that could loosen the rocks and destroy us as we travel. Maybe we would have liked the more rustic version. If we're going to take pictures or use the sidewalk to walk into the tunnel, let's just park safely and watch out for other cars who might have trouble seeing you in or near the tunnel, okay? Instead of 15 hairpin corners on this road, like National Park Service engineer George Goodwin had envisioned, there's only one real one, and it's coming up quickly. It's called the Loop, and if we have a chance to nab a parking space, I suggest we take it. You'll find parking below and also some on the inside of the Loop, too. This is one of those places where we have to take a selfie to prove we were here. And if you do, I hope you'll tag it with GuideAlong so we get to see your pictures, too. It is a masterfully crafted. The parking lot, the masonry guard wall, and steps on the inside of the 75-foot radius loop are the original ones built back in 1927 by just one stonemason. We can't help but notice that the forest at the loop has experienced fire, notably during the Trapper Creek fire. Now you can walk a little way along the Granite Park Trail to see close up how the forest is rejuvenating itself. If we had plans for a long hike, the trail from here takes you all the way to Granite Park Chalet, a very challenging 8 miles out and back hike. Now, if that doesn't sound like our bag, we can just keep on trying. Most iconic animals is its mountain goats. The large white animals with horns and 2 layers of wool that help them stay extra warm during Glacier's frigid winters. Their dense coat allows them to survive in temperatures as cold as minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, I don't think I'd mind a coat like that to get myself through those cold winter days either. Mountain goats often loiter on cliffs above us or eat in wildflower-filled meadows. In the summer, they mainly eat wildflowers, grasses, and something called sedge, a grassy plant with small flowers. They also spend a fair amount of time at natural salt lakes, although park scientists are studying if the mountain goats are spending less time at natural salt licks in favor of human salt, which ends up in the form of sweat on hand railings and rails, and even sadder antifreeze leaks in parking lots. The park scientists also want to know how climate change is affecting the goats, since they only live in the subalpine and alpine areas of the park, which are the coldest and highest areas. Glacier is experiencing warming at an astonishing rate of 3 times the global average at higher elevations. How mountain goats respond to the warming temperatures remains to be known. Because of these studies, we may see mountain goats with radio collars, which help researchers track their movements. There is a very long and steep drop-off that falls away from the road here. You can take my word for it, it can be really intimidating peering over the edge. This wall is where the biggest construction blasts happened on the entire route when workers were building going to the Sun Road. The National Park Service didn't want enormous holes ruining the landscape, so guys nicknamed powder monkeys hung onto ropes along the wall. First, they chiseled rock by hand. That sounds hard enough already. Then they plunged a small amount of explosives into the hole. To avoid any unwanted sparks, they wore big wool socks over their hobnailed boots. It took 3 weeks to bring in 500 kegs of black powder and 80 crates of dynamite on horseback for what was called the Big Shoot. Just imagine, when the dust settled, a worker was quoted as saying it was level as a finished roadbed. Not quite sure if that was just hopeful optimism. Long before the road existed or before the train arrived bringing tourists to what felt like a very wild area, the pagan branch of Blackfeet lived here, going back dozens of generations, spanning more than 10,000 years. Now just think about how long you've lived in your town and how well you know it. Then imagine if your family had lived in that same area for 10,000 years. Yeah, it kind of casts a new light on the term family traditions, doesn't it? Well, the Blackfeet, whose nation is east of Glacier National Park today, followed a nomadic life that brought them as far south as Yellowstone and all the way north into Canada. But they called the area known as the park today as the backbone of the world. What's incredible, fires and melting glaciers have revealed evidence of their ancestors' bison hunts, going back almost 5,000 years, with park researchers discovering bison bones, skulls, teeth, and more. Most of their recent history, the Blackfeet were feared by many tribes as great warriors who were more than 15,000 people strong. For a long time, they controlled almost all of Montana, and encounters with white people were peaceful. But then things started to fall apart for the Blackfeet and other tribes when the U.S. Army waged its campaign against bison from 1830 to 65, killing 40 million bison. Since tribes like the Blackfeet relied on bison for meat, clothes, and shelter, as well as spiritually, the animal's disappearance was devastating. And in 1895, the Blackfeet, on the brink of starvation, sold their lands that make up Glacier National Park today to the U.S. government. Didn't make much sense to the elders back then that anyone could own land or the wild animals that lived on it. 10 years before the tribe was forced to sell their land, Chief Crowfoot said, "We cannot sell the lives of men and animals. Therefore, we cannot sell this land." It It was put here for us by the Great Spirit. We cannot sell it because it does not belong to us. Chief Crowfoot's view of the world was so different than the Euro-American view of land ownership. Can you imagine what life would be like for us if his view prevailed? Today, almost 10,000 Blackfeet live on 1.5 million acres east of Glacier and south of the Canadian border.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
Well, by now, I'm sure we've seen a few of those famous red jammer buses go by. The vintage buses are from the 1930s and were the first authorized motor transportation utility allowed in the parks. Before the jammers, the first tour buses were horse carriages hauling 11 people at a time up the road. The rollback roof is great for taking in the scenery. The brilliant red color was chosen to match a ripe mountain ashberry. The drivers are called jammers because they could be heard jamming the gears of the buses as they grinded up the steep inclines. The fleet of 33 buses in Glacier are considered to be the oldest touring fleet anywhere in the world. And get this, in the old days, women were not allowed to sit in the front rows. What? Why, you ask?
Why?
Ask it. Go ahead, ask it.
Why?
They were thought to be too much of a distraction for the drivers. Well, if a guy can't keep his eyes on the road, maybe he ought to find a different job. Okie dokie, my friends, time to roll up our windows. After this next curve, we're going to drive along a section of road known as the Weeping Wall. Now, our experience with the Weeping Wall is a little bit different depending on the time of year. If it's still relatively early in the summer, or more importantly, early in the melt season, a cascade of water could be flowing off the wall onto the road. The water finds its way from melting snow and ice. The road engineers didn't choose this section as a practical joke to soak drivers and passengers. Nope. In fact, it was the roadwork itself that changed the flow of streams above and accidentally created this little piece of wet fun. Now they put large drains in to stop the flowing water from ripping up the road surface all the time. If you're looking at the weeping wall and wondering what the fuss is all about, then it's most likely that the snow melted. This section is part of the long ridge called the Garden Wall, or Mount Grinnell, named after the explorer George Bird Grinnell. It got its name from George and his friends who were camping in the region. Because they didn't have Wi-Fi or radios, they used to sit around the campfire and sing songs for entertainment in the evening. Yep, these folks were singing a popular song from the day, Over the Garden Wall. Someone looked up and said, "That's one garden wall we can't get over," and the name stuck. Take a photo. I'm no fan of taking pictures through the windshield of moving cars, but we don't have an awful lot of choice for what's coming up. Pretty quickly, we'll come around the corner and see the 3 beautiful stone arches that grace almost every postcard, map, and brochure of the Going to the Sun route. You'll have to admit that they are pretty awesome, aren't they? This is a case where water needed to be diverted to flow under the road. So construction workers built culverts so the road could pass over the top. Remember how this road was always intended to be built for sightseeing? Well, that made it important that those culverts blended in or enhanced the scenery. A crew of Russian stonemasons were in charge of these arches. They worked long into the night setting the keystones of the arches, then chiseled and chipped the rocks so they perfectly fit. If you're a little bit nervous about the idea of driving over these hand-built arches from nearly a century ago perched on the side of a mountain, I'm going to spoil the romance a little bit. There's more underlying structure in to reinforce the concrete. But the beautiful stone arch facades have been kept. Gotta say, that is a great decision.
What are he talking about?
I'm not quite sure where they goes on.
There's the
Right
arches.
there they are.
Oh.
Yes.
Yes. Down there. Mm-hmm.
Let's not forget to look back from time to time to see how far we've climbed. It's pretty cool, isn't it? This light to the top of the road was finished in October 1928. The following year, 14 Let's not forget, those were Model Ts and Model As and the likes on skinny tires on a roadbed of crushed rock or gravel, not this smooth pavement that we've got right now. Pretty impressive. We have some excellent stops coming up as we get to the high point of our drive. Just over the ridge, we'll reach the Logan Pass Visitor Center. But before we get there, we should make a stop at Oberlin Bend. We'll see a small parking lot on the right and stairs leading up from the parking area. If we can find a place to park, let's pull in. Those short stairs lead to a viewing platform with an excellent view back along the Going to the Sun Road. If it's a clear day, we'll be able to see all the way to Canada. Plus, the park's mountain goats love those rock ledges surrounding us there, and we'll have a better than average chance of seeing them. If the goats are close by, we'll want to give them lots of space. And please, never feed those goats or, in fact, any of the wildlife. You want to know something? I've actually seen bears wandering along the left side of the slope here, too. Maybe we'll get lucky and spot one today.
Is that here? Is this where we did that? This may be where we saw that.
Oh yeah, here.
The moon's down.
Just on our right is Oberlin Falls, and our parking area for Oberlin Bend is just ahead, also on our right.
That one we didn't take before, did we? This one.
Oh, we missed this
We're
one.
gonna take this one.
Congratulations, my friend. We have made it to Logan Pass, 6,646 feet above sea level. You'll want to turn right into the parking area for the Logan Pass Visitor Center. It is such a lovely spot. You'll find an excellent boardwalk-style hike through meadows of alpine flowers. It stretches about 1.5 miles to Hidden Lake Overlook. That trail is dotted with interactive storyboards explaining the topography along with the flora and fauna, and even some history, too. Plus, we'll have a high chance of spotting mountain goats and bighorn sheep. On the other side of the road is the trailhead for the popular but more... If we're planning to go further than the first 3 miles, a little bit of pre-planning is recommended. Staff at the Visitor Center can help us with any questions we might have.
There's no real reason to do that.
Okay.
Because, just get trapped in it.
Right.
And I'm not going to press my luck.
There's a reason why this road is only open in the summer months, and that reason is snow. A lot of it. I'm not sure where you're from. We get a ton of it here. The snow drifts can be as deep as 80 to 100 feet. Can you imagine what it's like trying to plow this out in the spring? Probably explains why I'm in the car with you and not driving a snow plow. Not much of a hard worker. Now, this stretch of road alone can add a month delay to fully opening the road. On the next big bend, we'll find a nice place to pull out that just so happens to be an ideal place for a picnic lunch. It's called, wait for it. Sorry, you are going to have to bring your own lunch. Pretty clever name, though. Ever since the park's founding, it has been a very popular place to enjoy a breakfast. I mean, a lunch.
We didn't stop here, did we?
No.
There's a reason why this road is only open in summer, and that reason is snow. A lot.
Wow.
Imagine trying to plow that out in spring. Man, this stretch alone can delay the opening of the road by a month. I guess it's time to do some high fives since we made it to Logan Pass.
Bye.
Let's start searching for a parking spot by the Visitor Center. As I mentioned, there is a fantastic hike to Hidden Lake Overlook here. We'll also find restrooms. I heard a couple of sighs of relief back there. On the other side of the road is the trailhead for the popular but more serious Highline Trail. If we plan to go further than the first 3 miles, some good pre-planning is definitely recommended. Staff at the visitor center can help us with any questions we might have.